Hello, I'm Jane Wernick. I'm very happy that I've just been given the Alumni Lifetime Achievement Award. I studied here, I graduated in 1976. I studied civil engineering and got a BSc in engineering. About a year and a half after I graduated, I was very fortunate to be moved to work onto a large project that was going to be built for the Saudi government, and a very important engineer called Peter Rice was an advisor to the group that was working on this project, and the architect Friotto was the architect for the special structures. It was hanging chain net structures, and I was like the baby of this group, and it turned out to be a really formative time for me, that we were working things out from first principles, not just using codes of practice, and so it was pretty exciting. Well, I knew right away it was very unusual for women to do engineering of any sort, and when I was here there were very few. I mean, sadly it seems like the numbers haven't gone up that much. I mean, when I graduated, I think there was less than 1% chartered. I think it's now edging towards 15%. So the numbers are better, but they're still pretty poor. And there's really a dearth of women at the top. Very, very few directors. And there are quite a few women-owned firms. I think I was the first woman-owned structural engineering firm. In fact, I'm now kind of a mentor to a little group of what they call female founders, which is nice. And in fact, that is very nice, because we've got a WhatsApp group and they share advice on, insurance and all these other sorts of things. Because what I do remember was it was lonely. So just, the women who were around me were secretaries really, or support staff generally. And I got on with them well, but there were very, very few just to have a conversation about what it was like. So I think there are now more women, so it's not quite so lonely at the lower levels. 1980 to 81, I actually moved to the States and worked just on the edges of Buffalo, working in a company that manufactures and directs and does the engineering for fabric roofs. So that was very interesting. And then I came back after that, so I was sort of seconded to them. And that was quite good, because all the way through my pre-university time and the few years afterwards, I was always sort of the baby of the group, nearly always the only woman in the group. And when I came back, I wasn't just remembered as how I had been pre-university, so I had done something in my own right, had been a project engineer, things like that. And then a few years later, there was a sort of internal advert for someone to go and work in the San Francisco office. And actually, when I'd been in the States in Buffalo, it was quite a lonely experience for me. I didn't know people, and I actually have a cousin who lives in San Francisco, so I applied for this like a shot. But in fact, I was then told, well, they were just about to start a new office in Los Angeles and they'd prefer me to go there. And I could tell that that was a really good experience, and it turned out to be. So it was a new multidisciplinary, so structural and services engineering office, and we started with 2 people, and over 2.5 years it grew to be about 35 people. It was interesting. It was an earthquake region, so I had to lay seismic design, and we did some hospitals, schools, some nice projects. And then I came back to the UK, and actually partly because of contacts I'd made at Harvard, I got introduced to doing more teaching of architects at Oxford Brookes and then the Architectural Association. And I managed ever since to sort of combine that a bit with practice. But I was back in Arup's office by then. And I stayed there until 98. And I did hit the glass ceiling, so that's why I left. But actually it turned out to be the best thing that could have happened to me. First I was just going to go, I thought I persuaded my parents that we'd move down to the West Country and I'd just make paper products and just give up engineering totally. But my brother said, who lives in Leicester, said he wouldn't visit us. So, and David and Julia actually persuaded me that they would like to work with me. So I set up this minuscule firm, and I didn't know what would happen. I thought we might just be doing house extensions or something. But as I was saying, I was very lucky that I knew enough architects who wanted to work on competitions with me. And if the project was abroad, they had to collaborate with architecture practices in those countries. And so it was fine that I also had to collaborate with engineering practices. So it didn't matter that I didn't have a big firm. So like with David Chipperfield, we won a a library in Des Moines, Iowa, and we did the competition for the Young Vic Theatre, and we won that with Hayes Tompkins. That was a great project. And then actually Dave and Julia were they were on the framework agreement at Kew Gardens, and they were asked to design a treetop walkway, because Tony Kirkham, who was the chief arboriculturist, was passionate about how trees can show young people the importance of trees for the climate. And he'd had a temporary walkway made out of scaffolding. So Dave and Julie said they wanted to work with me, and I had to write a letter and introduce myself, and luckily they accepted me. And that was a wonderful collaboration, that project. And on that one, we said that we should try and bring the steel fabricator in before we finished our design, because it was terribly important that what we designed could be built without killing the trees, otherwise there would be no point. So we got this fantastic person, David Marriott, who at the time was working for Britland Steel. So we had the fabricator who was also part of the team, and he got on very well with Tony and the tree surgeon. So when they were doing the building work, they could collaborate about which branches to yank and all the rest of it. And actually on that project, it was a really good design project, because Julia and I walked around the place where the walkway was to be with Tony Kirkham, and we were talking about how it should be a structure that didn't compete with the trees, so not to do some sort of flashy suspension structure. It should be something quite modest in a way, but we also discussed what material it should be made of. And you might think, well, timber would be brilliant, but the walkway is 18 metres above the ground, so you need quite tall cantilevers to support that walkway, and the structure would be quite large in dimension, even if not heavy in weight, if it was made of timber. So we knew that really steel would be a better solution. And then the issue is, well, what colour do you paint steel so it doesn't stick out like a sore thumb against the natural background? So I suggested weathering steel, which has this, it looks like a rusty surface. The rust actually protects the interior of the steel. And it kind of gets a patina that looks better with age, and Tony was immediately happy with this. And one really fantastic consequence of this is that you can't get rolled sections of weathering steel. So probably the most economical section would have just been a circular hollow tube. Now, I hate circular hollow tubes. They look much bigger than they really are, because you don't see any sharp edges, and I really like the triangular cross-section where you kind of see the vertex and your eye somehow gets deceived and you think it's smaller than it is. Well, luckily, because we couldn't get rolled sections of this, it could be fabricated out of plate. And in fact, it was more efficient in terms of the amount of material, because we could make it tapered. So the cantilever that's resisting wind load needs to be biggest at the bottom and less at the top. So that's why it's these tapering triangular sections which then split into 3 branches, and then they support bits of walkway which are at 14-metre centres. So that's how the design was initiated. I think we should use the climate crisis actually as a lever to get more young women into the profession, because I think women are tending to be attracted to wanting to help with the planet. They're going into more environmental things and sustainability. But actually, if sustainability was properly embedded in every aspect of how we design the built environment, then it'd be easier to attract them into it, I think. Well, I think to be involved in designing our environment in any aspect is very exciting, it's rewarding. It's great that you can walk along a road and point out to your mum that I worked on something. And well, as Philip Greenish was saying at the ceremony, if you can feel you can make a difference for people. So to choose engineering is something I'm sure you wouldn't regret. And I had another skill which not all engineers have, that I was good at drawing. My father was an artist, and particularly on these kind of unusual geometry projects, I was able to draw these 3D objects quite well. And I think if you can find your own special skills, it doesn't have to be that, whatever it is, try and find people who appreciate it and try and think of how you can bring those skills to bear. So architects in their course, they're taught how to, every week they have to present their work, they have to pin it on the wall and defend it. Engineers very rarely do that. So if you can learn to be brave enough to do that, but also be brave enough to ask So in my case, it's asking the architect, what is it you're trying to achieve here? What's your aspiration? And then you also start asking the client, what do you really want there? Or the services engineer. So, I mean, as you get older, you don't care so much about looking silly if you're asking a silly question, and you get braver and braver. But I think the earlier you can start being brave enough to ask questions, the better. I mean, there is that thing that when you're at university and you're studying, you're trying to pass your exams, and I don't know, you're learning a lot of kind of deep knowledge, but then you emerge and it suddenly felt like I couldn't do anything actually. And I remember sitting in the Royal Festival Hall looking up at the boxes and well, how does that work? I can design a beam and a column, but how does that? So it's taking that leap after you've graduated into looking at the world around you. I would also say, you know, really try quickly and look at buildings that you go into. As soon as you graduate, just look at everything, try and work out how it's working. And, you know, we grow up in this physical world. We know that a chair on 4 legs is more stable than the one on 3. Mind you, we know that if it's only got 3 legs, it's not going to wobble. So, you know, just kind of keep clocking what works all the time and to kind of develop that curiosity about your own subject, but also about everybody else's. Apart from really enjoying all the students coming up and getting their awards this morning, which was very cheerful, that was lovely. No, it does feel very nice to be recognised, so I do appreciate that.